I've always said the telegraph knows a man's soul better than the preacher does. Most nights in Cinder Gulch, after the last train whistle fades and the saloon's piano goes quiet, it's just me and the key. I keep the lamp low, the ledger open, and the line humming like a cricket choir in summer. Honest work mostly. Farm reports. Cattle prices. A widow asking her son to come home for her birthday. It's a private sort of sacred, being the first to read words that ride in on wire before they reach another human ear. But the night that changed everything, the key stuttered at 12:30, with a message that never should have come through my station. He hangs tomorrow for my crime. Call sign, ... Sheriff Barrow Kincaid's signature. My stomach turned to frost. I sat still for so long the ink dried on the nib. My brother Noah had hanged the spring before strung up, after being convicted of robbing a stagecoach out near Devil's Thumb. The sheriff testified, swore, Noah fired the shot that killed the guard. Even let me cry in his office after the sentence came down. He gave me coffee and promised Noah would meet his maker clean. And now this. I copied the wire again, careful this time, hands shaking so hard the letters shivered across the page. The sheriff had sent that message to someone somewhere, but the wire misrouted, skipped a relay, and landed in my lap like a thunderclap in a church. He confessed. The air went thick. I could hear Noah again, choking back fear from the gallows steps. I could see the way the sheriff had folded his hat in his hands that day, like he was the one burdened. I'd spent months swallowing the guilt that maybe Noah had done it. Maybe there was something in him I never saw, and I'd tried to move on. Lord, I'd even thanked Sheriff Kincaid for his mercy. I wanted to be sick. I wanted to run screaming down Main Street and rattle every window until the whole town knew. But I didn't. I took the confession, folded it tight, and slipped it down the front of my corset. Then I oiled the key, reset the line, and copied the wire into my personal ledger just in case. That ledger, it held years of telegrams no one ever asked about. Things husbands sent mistresses, bribes in code, even a banker's threat veiled as Bible verse. I never said a word. That wasn't my place. But this was my brother. That night I didn't go home. I stayed in the station, lantern burning low, revolver within reach. I replayed that message in my head like a funeral hymn. He hangs tomorrow for my crime. The sheriff had killed my brother, or framed him, which was no different. Either way, the truth was buried under 6 feet of dry clay and a crooked man's boots. Well, the wire may tangle, but it never lies. People do. Founders Day in Cinder Gulch is the kind of event that puts polish over rot. The whole town turns out in their Sunday best, all gingham skirts and fresh-pressed vests, pretending we don't smell the blood beneath the bunting. The mayor gives a speech no one listens to. Reverend Amos Hollis blesses the roast hog and the lemonade, while the brass band tries to stay in tune against a stiff mesa wind. Kids chase hoops down the dusty main road, and old-timers trade war stories they've polished to silver. And there, in the center of it all, shaking hands and patting backs, stands Sheriff Barrow Kincaid, smiling like a man with clean hands. He's still got the same long coat he wore the day they marched Noah to the gallows. Still wears his badge like it's nailed to his soul. And at his hip, the jailhouse keys jingle every time he moves. They sound cheerful, like wind chimes. But I know better. I hover near the lemonade barrel, trying to act like I belong in my own skin. When I see Deputy Tom Vale approach the sheriff, they lean in close. Vale's voice is low, but the wind shifts just right. The key girl knows more than she should. Kincaid's smile doesn't change, but his eyes do. They go still flat as an old coin. My spine locks tight. I walk away slow, real slow. I wave at Mrs. Dewhurst. I let little Georgie Harper throw a paper frog at me. Then I make my way to the office, keeping my heart from racing with pure spite. Inside, the key ticks again. Another message. Short. No loose ends tonight. Same call sign. Sheriff Kincaid. The blood drains from my hands so fast I nearly drop the headset. They mean to shut me up. Tonight. The thought makes my teeth hurt. I look out the office window at the crowd laughing, dancing, gossiping. A few hours from now, I might be a name whispered over breakfast biscuits. I open my ledger, turn to the blank back pages. My hands work without thought. I copy the confession again. Then I tear that page out and slip out the back door, boots crunching gravel soft as a prayer. The church bell tower's been closed since last year's lightning strike cracked its top beam, but the ladder still holds. I climb up, one hand clutching that paper like it's my lifeline, and wedge it deep under the cradle where the bell hangs. The wind-up here smells like rain and judgment. Good. If they silence me, someone will find the truth when they ring the bell for my funeral. Back at the office, I sit down and tap out a test message to the federal marshal in Santa Fe. Need confirmation. Urgent. Suspect sheriff. Corruption. More to come. I wait. Nothing. Maybe they're out. Maybe they're ignoring me. Or maybe someone's already cut the line. Either way, I won't be the next body hanging silent on Cinder's main road. I pour myself a cup of stale coffee. My Derringer sits hidden under the desk lip. I touch it like a talisman. The sheriff framed my brother, and now he's coming for me. Let him. The wire's awake now, and I've got more than my life to lose. Ezra Dorn showed up just after dusk, holding wildflowers and carrying a look I used to trust. He's the schoolmaster, fair-haired, quiet, gentle as a mule deer. When Noah died, Ezra brought me soup and read psalms out loud till I fell asleep. When my hands shook too much to run the key, he tapped in my place. We got close. Close enough that last fall. I promised him a winter wedding, and he promised me steady days. But that was before the wire started confessing. Ezra looked the same, shirt sleeves rolled, collar buttoned neat, hair slicked back with water. But there was a smear of red clay on his cuff, drying at the edge. That same thick mud only found in the sheriff's stable yard, the kind that cakes deep and stays put. You're working late, he said, setting the flowers on my desk like an offering. Didn't want you missing the sunset. I've got cables to monitor, I said, tapping the key absently. Government business. He smiled, but his eyes kept darting to the drawer where I'd stashed the first confession copy. My heart thudded hard enough I thought he might hear it. I came by just to talk, he said. Too easy. Head's aching, something awful, I murmured. Maybe tomorrow. He lingered a moment, then nodded, and left with a backward glance that scraped my nerves raw. The second the door shut, I leapt to the drawer. Empty. The confession was gone. My knees buckled like they'd been kicked out from behind. I leaned against the desk, bile rising in my throat. Ezra, my Ezra, had taken it, which meant he knew what it said, which meant he'd known something all along. And if he handed it off to Kincaid... I opened the drawer beneath that one and pulled out my father's Derringer, wrapped in a monogrammed handkerchief, loaded it slow, careful, slid it into the inside of my boot, and stood tall even if my insides were shaking like paper on fire. Love was supposed to anchor a person. Ezra had been my dock in storm water. Now he was the storm. I went to the key and tapped out another wire to Santa Fe. Second attempt. Urgent. Sheriff Kincaid implicated in false conviction. Immediate confirmation needed. Still no reply. I checked the line. Still live, which meant something or someone was stopping the reply on the other end. And Ezra? He wasn't just keeping secrets, he was in them. I lit a fresh lantern and opened my personal ledger. For the first time, I flipped back through pages, looking not for strangers' sins, but signs I'd missed, phrases from Ezra, words too polished, smiles too calm. They were all there. His comfort had always come too fast, like a man preparing for grief he'd already read about. I looked down at the wildflowers wilting on my desk, my mouth curled into a smile that had no warmth in it. Pretty, I said aloud, but dead. So was whatever we had. And maybe so was I, if I didn't start fighting smarter. Ezra always walked like a man with nothing to hide. That night, he walked into the sheriff's livery stable like his conscience was clean. I kept to the shadows by the old tannery, my boots silent in the dust. The barn lamps painted streaks of orange across the yard, making the night bleed. I saw Ezra's silhouette pass beneath the rafters, the sharp flick of his shoulders tense in a way only guilt can shape. Inside the stable, he wasn't alone. Sheriff Kincaid stood near a stack of feed sacks, arms crossed, his long coat catching firelight. And beside him, in full black frock and collar, was Reverend Amos Hollis, grinning like the devil at a poker table. I slipped closer, heart banging like a drum. The open window gave me the rest. He's got the confession, Ezra said, handing over the page I'd hidden. She doesn't know I took it. She knows, Hollis said, teeth flashing. She sent another message. Kincaid growled. Then we end this tonight. Reverend Hollis held the page up to the lamplight and hummed. She's clever, he said. We'll be cleverer. That's when I stepped in. I'd prefer honest, I said, leveling the derringer at the back of Ezra's head. But I'll settle for terrified. They all turned. Ezra went pale as milk. Kincaid reached for his sidearm, but I cocked the hammer and aimed between his eyes. Next move's your last, I said. Now, Miss Lane, Hollis started. No. My voice cracked like a whip. You framed my brother. Ezra raised his hands. It wasn't that simple. Then explain it, I snapped. Right now, out loud. Ezra licked his lips. Noah was involved, but not like they said. He didn't rob that stage. He was the mule. The what? He carried records, ledgers. Kincaid's ledger, Ezra said, voice shaking. For a cut. That's why the sheriff turned on him. Noah got greedy. Said he'd go public if he didn't get more. I stared at them all, bile climbing my throat. My brother had died for threatening to expose them not for a crime, but for truth. He was no saint, Kincaid spat. He stole from me. He stole his life back, I said. And you took it. I ordered Ezra to the corner where my office's backup wire ran my private line to the spur relay station, hidden behind a feed trough. I'd installed it months back when the main line got struck by lightning. Funny how secrets save lives. Send it, I told Ezra. Everything. Who? What? When? Names. Payments. Confession. He hesitated. I pressed the derringer to his temple. He tapped it out. The clatter of the key cut through the stable like thunder through prayer. Hollis's lip twitched. Kincaid stared at me with something that wasn't quite hate, it was fear. I had them. The wire was my witness. The whole territory would know by sunrise. I waited until the message clicked complete. Then I lowered the gun and stepped back. You were supposed to marry me, I whispered. Ezra didn't look up. I know. And now I knew everything. Night settled heavy over Cinder Gulch, the kind of dark that eats up lantern light and spits it back as shadow. I waited until the streets cleared, then headed for the church. My boot pressed Ezra's derringer tight against my ankle, like a second pulse. The bell tower loomed ahead, ribs of black wood against a bruised sky. Thunder rolled across the mesa, slow and low, stacking up in the clouds. A storm was coming from the heavens and from me. I climbed fast, lantern swinging, heart pounding. At the top, I slipped through the trapdoor and reached under the cradle where I'd hidden the ledger page. My fingers touched parchment, then something thicker. My ledger. I didn't remember placing the whole book there, but maybe fear makes memory soft. Or maybe I knew even then that I'd need more than a single scrap to bring them down. I sat beneath the bell and flipped through the pages. It wasn't just Kincaid's confession. There were telegrams from ranchers paying to swing juries, notes from cattle barons arranging accidents, bank transfers in code, and worst of all, an entry scrawled in sharp, clear ink. Payment rendered. Widow's debt. Noah. I read it twice, 3 times. My mouth went dry. Noah had taken hush money. Or maybe extortion. It didn't matter. Either way, it put a crack in the foundation I'd built my grief on. My brother had danced with devils and lost, but the devils still walked free. A creak on the ladder snapped my head up. Then a voice, smooth as polished sin. That ledger don't belong to you. Reverend Hollis stepped into the tower, pistol in hand, lit by the dim yellow of a hidden lamp. He smiled like a man who preached one gospel and lived another. It's over, I said, closing the book. He chuckled. Oh, darling, this is the over. You can burn that book, marry Ezra, and live soft the rest of your days. Or we can let gravity do the Lord's work. He motioned to the open window behind him. The town will weep for you, he said. Girl overcome with grief, climbs the bell tower, tumbles in despair. We'll ring this bell for you come Sunday. I stood, ledger tight to my chest, my spine straight. You ever read Proverbs Zays and Wintig, Zaven and Wintig? I asked. His brow furrowed. Whoso diggeth a pit shall fall therein. I reached behind me and yanked the bell rope with both hands. The bronze throat above us sang out thunderous, shaking the tower down to its nails. Hollis flinched, gun swinging wild, and I used the chaos to shove the ledger into the clapper yoke overhead, wedging it tight, where only a second rope could reach. He couldn't see it, but I knew it was safe. "What did you just do?" he barked. "Left something for God to read." He raised the pistol again, but footsteps echoed below. "Someone's coming," I said. "They'll want to know why you're up here." He hissed a curse and backed down the ladder, vanishing like smoke. I slumped to the boards and exhaled slow. Rain started tapping the roof like fingers on a coffin lid. Let it come. Let the whole sky break open. The truth was tucked where only angels could wring it loose. Founders' Day ended like it always did, with a dance. Grange Hall smelled of sweat, whiskey, and roasted meat. Fiddle music bounced off the walls, feet stomped in rhythm, and every man tried not to step on his partner's hem. Lightning flashed outside like lanterns behind thin curtains, but inside it was all laughter and stomping boots. Sheriff Kincaid spun the mayor's wife around the floor, laughing like a man with nothing to fear. Reverend Hollis stood near the punch bowl, nodding to widows like he hadn't threatened me with a pistol an hour before. I stood by the door, soaked through from the rain, hair clinging to my cheeks. I felt like a ghost, watching the living dance. My hands trembled, not with fear anymore, but fury. I stepped onto the stage. No one noticed at first. The band kept fiddling. Dancers twirled. Then I cut the lamps. All of them. With one yank of the fuse line I'd rigged that afternoon, the hall plunged into darkness. I threw open the storm shutters. Thunder cracked. Wind gusted through, setting dresses flapping and men cursing. Then I lit one lantern set high above the bandstand and climbed to the mic horn beside my desk. I held up a telegram, ink still wet. "The federal marshal received my message," I said, voice ringing out over the crowd. "He's on his way." But I didn't wait. Murmurs rippled. Kincaid froze mid-step. I looked straight at him. "I've wired your confession across the spur line. The whole territory's heard it." He moved before I finished the sentence hand to holster, boot scuffing wood. But Ezra came out of nowhere, charging him like a bull, knocking me to the floor as the gun fired. The shot cracked the air. Ezra stumbled back, blood blooming across his chest. I screamed. He gripped my arm, eyes glassy. "Don't let him talk pretty," he rasped. "He'll turn the town." He collapsed, coughing. A ribbon of red slipped from his mouth. The crowd backed away, silent now. Even the storm seemed to hush. I crawled to the mic horn and dragged it to the edge of the stage, right next to the telegraph table I'd moved there earlier. Then I took the live wire I'd spliced into the line and clamped it to the horn mouthpiece. "Every word in this hall," I said, loud and shaking, "is riding that wire. Every station on the spur line is listening. Every name, every crime, every coward act." Kincaid reached for his pistol again. I leveled the derringer. "Holster it," I said. I did. Slowly. The townsfolk looked between us, eyes wide. "The wire's singing now," I said. "And she don't lie." The mic horn hissed beside me, a crackle of static riding the wire like breath on cold glass. I stood atop the stage, rain soaking through the open shutters. My voice carried not just to the crowd in the Grange Hall, but through every telegraph station east and west of Cinder Gulch. "Barrow Kincaid, Amos Hollis, step forward." The sheriff straightened his collar, face hard as barnwood. Hollis adjusted his cuffs like we were still in Sunday service. But they came. The crowd parted slow, eyes flicking between them and me like watching cards fall in a poker game no one wants to play. "You want to explain it?" I asked. "Tell the people you swore to serve?" Hollis stepped forward first, the holy man's calm still painted on his face. "My heart breaks for Miss Lane," he said, loud and oily. "Grief makes us see shadows. Her brother was a troubled soul. I cut him off with a page torn from my ledger. "Payment to widow's debt, Noah. Your words. Your wire." Someone in the back gasped. Hollis paled just enough for me to notice. "You called him a thief from the pulpit," I said, "while buying his silence with congregation funds." Hollis' voice faltered. "A misinterpretation. Liar," I snapped. The wire ticked behind me. I let it. Kincaid stepped up next, jaw clenched. "I kept order," he growled. "The law out here ain't clean. It's necessary." You framed my brother, I said, then planned to kill me for asking why. He looked at the townsfolk. You want this place crawling with marshals? With judges who never rode a horse but think they know our world? I kept Cinder safe. For who? I asked. For men who paid you off? For crooks with Bibles in their pockets? No one moved. Then I saw her Mrs. Lawton, the widow from the ledger entry, crying by the back door. Her hand clutched a shawl tight to her chest. Her mouth trembled. Kincaid's spell cracked like thin ice. I raised my voice. You all trusted them. I did too. But the wire knows. The wire remembers. I've got the ledger and the names and the proof. He lunged. Not at me, but at the table. At the wire. I fired. The Derringer barked loud in the hall. The bullet hit the ceiling, showering dust and plaster onto Kincaid's coat. He froze. Touch that wire again, I said, and the next one lands lower. I turned to the people, the ledgers in the bell tower. Let's fetch it. They hesitated, then moved. We went as one, the whole town, through the rain, up the tower. I guided them to the bell cradle, where I pulled the ledger free and held it high. Back at the hall, I opened it to the cipher pages, the ones Noah had risked everything to carry. I placed it on the table. Then I looked Kincaid in the eye. Read your sins, I said. Into the horn. He hesitated, then picked up the pages, his own handwriting, staring back at him, and began to speak. The wire crackled. The wire sang. And this time, the whole world listened. The sound of hoofbeats rolled in like judgment. By the time Kincaid finished reading his confessions into the mic horn, his hands were shaking. Half the town stood in the Grange Hall, with rain-slick hair and wet boots, watching the sheriff of Cinder Gulch reduced to a man, unraveling syllable by syllable. The last word left his lips. The wire ticked faintly, and then the door burst open. 2 marshals entered first, slickers dripping, rifles drawn. Behind them, a third man stepped through, tall, bone-thin coat, starched like a ledger's edge. The territory marshal himself. He swept off his hat, eyes scanning the wreckage of a town learning it had been duped. Miss Lane, he said, tipping his brim to me. We got your first wire. My breath caught. Just the first? He nodded. The second never arrived. Intercepted on the relay. Someone's got long fingers. Hollis didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened just enough. The marshal turned to Kincaid. Sheriff Barrow Kincaid, you're under arrest for obstruction, conspiracy, and falsifying court evidence. He turned toward Hollis next. But instead of cuffs, the marshal gave a nod. A slow, knowing nod. Reverend, he said. Debt paid. The words landed like a bullet I didn't see coming. My blood went cold. What does that mean? The marshal didn't look at me. Hollis did. I was their informant, he said quietly. Federal. For years. Fed them just enough sinners to keep my hands clean. You tried to kill me, I whispered. I tried to keep the bigger machine running, he replied. You were a risk. My mouth opened, then shut. So justice had a price tag, and my brother's death was small, change in a bigger pot. I turned to Ezra. He lay on a stretcher at the edge of the room, face pale, breath thin. He looked like a man made of smoke, but when our eyes met, he smiled, weak and lopsided. I sent a third, he rasped. What? Wire? Copy. Ledger notes. Didn't tell you. Didn't trust anyone. Not even me. He reached into his coat pocket and held out a sealed envelope. The territory judge, he whispered. Addressed it myself. I took it from his hand. He let go like it weighed nothing, but I felt every ounce of justice wrapped in that paper. The marshal eyed it warily. That don't need to go any further, he said. We've handled it here. I looked around, at the people still standing, at the ledger on the table, at Ezra, who'd tried too late to be good but tried. No, I said. You don't get to bury this. I stepped forward and placed the sealed packet in the marshal's palm in full view of the town. This goes to the judge. Both of them stand trial, civil and church. He hesitated, then gave a small nod. As the marshals led Kincaid and Hollis out into the storm, I walked to the telegraph table, stared at the key, and sat down. The marshal paused. You ever think of wearing a badge? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I ran my fingers over the key. the instrument that carried grief and truth in equal measure. My voice would never be louder than the men who'd lied, but it would be faster. "Leave it on the desk," I said. He smiled and dropped it. Then he rode out into the dark, his coat whipping behind him, and I stayed behind with the wire, and the truth, and no more lies left to untangle.
Thanks for riding with Coyote's Campfire Tailies. Stay by the fire and pick your next story.